thanks for having me. Thanks for the patience to the last talk before lunch. I have to warn you, this will be a heavy one, hardcore philosophy, psychoanalysis, death drive, narcissism, primal scene, you all know about that. But of course, it's a joke, so luckily enough, there were other people before who dealt with that, and I can just relate to them, so I don't have to go into it too deep. I talked about the topic of immersion before, I think at this very place 2 years ago or so, and now I'm going to present another take on the topic, hopefully a more advanced one. And the talk is called Inversive Future, the myth of immersive technology and the unwilling suspension of disbelief. I was actually triggered by the term immersive technology. And I was wondering, is technology immersive, or can technology be immersive by itself? I was looking at the introductory text, the announcement text of InSonic, and of course there are plenty of examples which state that. So if we start here, in the middle, we discourse about new immersive future technologies. We have immersive research and presentation platforms, immersive projection technology, immersive sound systems. Users are being excited by new and immersive VR and AR applications. So, and there's even another one. That's the one, there was another one in between. So, at least there is the claim that technology is immersive. Let's see whether that works. It does, perfect. Maybe even that one? No? Anyway, it doesn't matter. So, how could we describe immersion? Of course, that's an old question, has been addressed a couple of times, also today, often approached, and I won't be able to solve it here, of course. But let's put together a couple of items. So one certainly would be illusion, something to do with illusion. We talk about immersion or presence if we are able to engage with something which is presented to us. Actually, usually it's presented by media, so it's a mediated presentation. And we can engage with that as if it was real. That's usually what we mean if we talk about immersion. We may behave or act in terms of the presented. So, for example, in terms of the presented narrative. But then we have the term virtual reality. So we have reality in the same discussion. And so what does reality have to do with technology? And well, what we all know is our aim to make technology perfect, such that we can treat things presented by technology as being real. So we need the perfect technology, and what we want to achieve is that this technology passes a kind of VR Turing test, I'm going to call it. So if we cannot distinguish the presented thing anymore from reality, then the technology passed the Turing test. Like some artificial intelligence programs behaving like a psychotherapist did before. You know, these examples, Eliza. From there I derived the VR Turing test. So we want to have perfect illusion by perfect technology. So we arrive at the development of technology, and with that we arrive at technological progress, something that develops and gets better and better. We have older technology, former technology, that is obsoleted by later technology, by recent technology, which will again be obsoleted by future technology. But there seems to be a kind of problem in the relation with perfection, because recent technology is always perfect, and past technology is always obsolete, so imperfect. And we can look at that if we look at older technology, so like some advertisements from the past. Pourquoi écoutez-vous la moitié seulement de vos disques? Why do you only listen to half of your records? Because you need a stereo record player in order to listen to the other half. It's even technically wrong, because you listen to the sum of both halves with a mono record player, but that's a side note. And of course, similarly, same era, same technology, Magnavox stereo systems recreate music with breathtaking realism. There we have the realism. And superb tonal quality. Big enough to fill a concert hall, small enough to fit in a shelf. This is the closest to la vérité, not reality, but truth. Closest to perfection. It's different than others. So it's all going into the same direction. And there's another advertisement from a different realm, from the visual realm, stereoscopic projection, picture so lifelike, you feel you are still there. So that's almost the definition of presence. You feel you are still there. Small text more or less about the same. So that's more or less should indicate that this will happen to today's perfect technology. We have to, we are facing that, of course. So this is funny now, and it will be funny for our VR sets of today. So we somehow have a problem with the perfection of technology and the immersion it causes, if it causes the immersion. But why does it still work? Why do we do a conference which just claims that, or is even named after that? I think it works because it's a narrative. And it's not only a narrative which applies to the narratives of so-called content, so things we do with this technology, but it's also a narrative which applies to the technology itself and to the progress of technology. This in itself is a narrative we believe. And, well, if we rely on an expert of narratives, we can go back to Samuel Coleridge 200 years ago, who described something we nowadays would probably call immersion. That's the willing suspension of disbelief. I put the original page of the book, but it's in the middle somewhere. My endeavors should be directed to persons and characters supernatural, or at least romantic, yet so as to transfer from our inward nature a human interest and a semblance of truth sufficient to procure for these shadows of imagination that willing suspension of disbelief for the moment, which constitutes poetic faith. So the faith would be the moment when we get into immersion, and that works because we suspend for a moment our disbelief in technology, our our skepticism, I would say. So that's another definition, and what's very important here is the little word, the willing suspension of disbelief. So it seems to be a kind of deliberate act of the spectator who wants to be immersed, and I think there's a kind of a key of the question I'm dwelling at. So, are you still writing? So, what about virtual reality and the real we faced before? So I blank that again. Yeah. Back to the VR Turing test. Usually when we talk about virtual reality, it seems to be some kind of reality which is not real, but virtual. So there's a kind of opposition of reality, of real and the virtual. And I think as a kind of thought experiment must have been done before, I'm certainly not the first. What if we really achieve a complete conversion of the real and the virtual? So let's say we use a kind of VR set, but it's not only a kind of perceptual illusion, and it's not only a perceptual illusion which we cannot take apart from real perception, but if we cannot take apart the situation at all, so if we really cannot distinguish anymore whether we are in reality or in a kind of medial presentation. At this point, I would say the discussion becomes pointless, because if there is no difference anymore between them, we don't need any terms to differentiate. So this certainly doesn't, well, and of course then we come to the question if we are living in a matrix anyway and everything is virtual at all, so then the discussion certainly ends and we need other topics to discuss. So, so I think that's not, that, and I think also we do not mean that when we try to improve our technology. We don't mean that point. What we actually want to achieve, the kind of convergence we want to achieve, is that we want to achieve an illusion which could be taken for reality, or which could be mixed up with reality if something points coming later. So I think there seems to be a problem with this opposition of real and virtual. And again, there was somebody before me who thought that, which is Or Ettlinger. Or Ettlinger developed a theory called the virtual space theory. This is usually, for him, it's more directed at visual domain and architecture, but I think it can be applied to sound, to literature as well. I didn't do that systematically yet, but I think it's quite well. It should work, but I will do that probably later. So for him, the virtual space is a kind of space which is created by pictorial presentation on a projection device. For example, a painting, or a projection canvas, or stereophonic glasses, and I would add or binaural headphones, for example, or, as we saw in the advertisements before, by 2 loudspeakers and stereophonic technology. I won't go into the details of the virtual space theory, because it's a more complex thing, but what's very important to my topic here is that he questioned the opposition of real and virtual and proposed different terms for that. So he said that virtual is not the antonym of real, but it's the antonym of physical. So the distinction is between something physical and something virtual, but not between virtual and real. And then, of course, the second question arises, what's then the antonym of real? And he says the antonym of real is the simulacrum, which was developed before in French philosophy. So, and this can be shown, he illustrates by 2 examples, where we have twice the Eiffel Tower, one in Paris and the other one in Las Vegas. And he says, well, they are both physical, none of them is virtual, but one of them is real, the Parisian one, and the other one is the simulacrum, because it looks like the Parisian one, but it doesn't. It shares lots of properties, but it's the actual thing is different, because it's just not in Paris and it was not the first one built, it's not the original. So that's the simulacrum. That's the simpler example. And now more closer to our discussion, the second example is the castle of the Sleeping Beauty in Disney film from 59, yeah. So left picture, left image is the castle in the film. The right image is a reconstruction of the castle of the film in Disneyland. So if we apply our terms there, then we have the distinction between something physical and something virtual. So the first castle in the film is virtual. It exists only in virtual space. Of course, it exists on the canvas, on the projection screen, it's drawn somehow, but the image, our image of the castle, is in virtual space. It's not real space, not physical space. Physical space is the one in Disneyland. But if it comes to reality now, then the virtual one is the real one, because that's the castle in the film, that's the original, so to say. And the physical one is the simulacrum, because it was constructed after the film and it should hint at the film somehow. And I think here the terms become quite clear, and it also becomes clear why the opposition of virtual and real would fail here. And I think that's quite a fruitful thing to go on. And it's interesting, this theory is from 2008, and still it apparently did not arrive in the discussions on virtual reality, because the opposition of virtual and real, it's all the time done in the discussion. It's not yet, this problem is not yet discovered or not yet dealt with in our discussion, to my impression. So now to the promised psychoanalytic part. Luckily enough, there's not so much time left, so this will be a quick one. Let's start with Octave Manoni, French psychoanalyst. And he is talking about magic and about beliefs. And there's one example I would introduce. There's one article I know well, but all the same, je sais bien, mais quand même. And there we have a quote in the middle again. A person watching a magician perform does not for an instant believe that his tricks are magic. Yet she insists that the illusion be perfect. We would be hard put to say who is supposed to be fooled. Because there are spectators, there is a magician, all know that it's fake, so to say, but still we somehow believe in that because it's a perfect illusion and somebody could believe it's real, it works. So that's the tricky point here. So the question is, who does really believe that? And this was picked up by, for example, by Austrian philosopher Robert Pfaller in his interpassivity theory. And actually in this, in the article shown before, Manoni develops the terms of croyance and foi. Croyance would be a kind of belief, a kind of superstition, Aberglaube in German, Pfaller puts it. And then there's foi, faith, Bekenntnis, Pfaller translates it to German, the two forms of conviction. So there's one which the real belief, like partially the one in religion, for example, but not all of them. And there's the other one which is both believed and not believed at the same time. That's a very tricky thing, which is a psychoanalytic thing. I won't go into detail. It's done by Manoni with reference to Freud. And the interesting thing here is that croyance is the belief which is attributed to somebody else. So it's already somebody else believing, but it's not clear who. And that's why Pfaller calls it an illusion without owners. So there's a magician, and he's doing a perfect illusion, but it's not my perfect illusion. It's something else's illusion. It's a kind of delegated consumption, so to say. That's the core of the interpassivity theory, which talks about the delegation of enjoyment by the delegation of reception. So interpassivity means more passive than passive, and as the spectator has even greater enjoyment if he can also delegate his consumption. So one example by Slavoj Žižek is the canned laughter in American TV series. So the laughter in the background all the time when something should be indicated as being funny. And he said it's not only to indicate that something is funny, but it's also to indicate that the series is already been watched by somebody else. So me, as somebody in front of the TV, I don't even need to watch because it has its built-in consumption instance, so to say. And for me, the enjoyment is even greater if I know that the movie is already been watched. There are other examples like by Faller, students copying books in the library like crazy because the copying act is already reading. So we copy our books and we go home completely content because we did our work. The books were already read by the copy machine. So that's also delegation of consumption. And there's an example which matches the season, also Slavoj Žižek. And furthermore, and again, are we not doing the same with our children? We go through the ritual of Santa Claus since our children are supposed to believe in it and we do not want to disappoint them. Then there's about politicians and then there's the canned laughter example. So that's all this figure of the illusion of somebody else. And I have the impression that this theory can be applied to our dealing with virtual reality and with so-called immersive technology. And I think it explains both this problem with technological progress and the technological failure we saw before in the advertisements. So it works somehow for some time, but later on it doesn't work anymore because there's something new which works better. And this thing I think is solved by this theory, because the enjoyment we have from experiencing virtual reality, I think, comes from this kind of delegation. So of course we know it's not real, but we know somebody could be fooled by that. Somebody could take it for real, could take it for granted. And if the time was not over now, I could really go now into psychoanalysis, because from there it starts. Because Faller says this is a kind of a perverse delight. If I say, somebody could be fooled, and then there comes all the stuff like fetishism and the uncanny and the comic and mimesis, which will be dealt with by somebody else tomorrow, I read in the announcement. So, well, and I'm going into this next time, as promised. But for me, the conclusion here is, because I'm talking about the immersive technology, is that we may take care do not get too narcissistic in terms of technology. Like if you say, well, technology has to get more perfect and perfect, this is a kind of narcissism if we don't have a croyance, but a foi, a real faith in the perfect technology. And I think that could lead us to an inversive future instead of an immersive future. And I want to conclude with this word in the title, because I was looking for a play of words and found out, okay, there is inversive, but as I'm not a native speaker, so I checked with a colleague, friend of mine, Anthony Moore, and that's what he replied in his email. Okay, inversive is not a word I'm familiar with. I suspect it would mean more like a future that looks into itself rather than moving back whilst moving forward. A future that is self-contained and doesn't reflect on the present, past, or even more distant future. A kind of self-sufficient future. In other words, a future that is immersed in itself, not bad. I think you could use it as a title, even if it is rarely used. It might get people thinking. So, of course, what I hope is to have achieved the latter. Thank you.